How's my sound? Good?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, yeah.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. And who knew? It's an exploration of the Jewish experience. And today, Rabbi Zober will be meeting at Sinai Robert Dickens. And we're going to get quite a bit of history about our synagogue and our area here. I wanted to thank Jewish Nevada for being a sponsor of the program, our Temple Sinai Board of Directors for supporting the program, our president, Tova McGilvray, for always being here for our programs, Michael Gordon and Tommy Seidel for all the logistics, all the audio. I don't know if they're camera people, if they're the sound effects, if they're the set design. So just pick an Oscar category, and that's those people. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Benjamin Zober.
All right. I've got a mic, so yeah, you can keep that and heckle from the back. So welcome everyone, and Robert. So thank you so much for sitting down with us. So I will just say before we start, the idea I met you at Sinai, except we met before Sinai. You are the first person in town that Rabbi Sarah and I met face to face, because you picked us up from the airport when we got here all those years ago on that cold February night. And I'm really glad that you did.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, we've been, just to say personally, we've been so fortunate to be here and so glad to be part of this community. And despite the fact that it was a really cold, gray weekend, and everyone kept telling us, I remember you took us to Lake Tahoe, and everyone, oh, you're going to see Lake Tahoe, and I think everyone thought they'll see Lake Tahoe and they'll be sold. Like, we want to be here, like, let's start tomorrow. And it was gray and it was dreary. And I thought, this is not very, I don't know why everyone's raving about Lake Tahoe. It seems like any other lake, just cold. And then fortunately we stuck with it. And then we came back and started and went out in, mid-August and went, oh, I get it now. This is really beautiful. So, glad that we didn't let people's overselling the winter Lake Tahoe sour us on the experience.
I was doing my best to oversell the region and the congregation. I'm Robert Dickens. My specialty, I think, over my history at Temple Sinai has been handling rabbinical searches. Which one did? Terry. Terry. That seems to be my specialty, and I'm happy when it's successful, as it was with Myra and clearly with the Zobers. We won't talk about some of the others, though. As I was leaving High Holiday services, Joel said to me, "Aren't you the oldest living born in Reno Jew?" And I had never looked at it from that perspective, but as a Southern Nevada individual transplanted to Northern Nevada, I think Joel was probably right. The invitation in that parking lot encounter made me reflect quite a bit on what I might have to say at this opportunity. It's very impressive and nice to see the sanctuary and to see a little bit of the painting going on. It tells me that this is a viable congregation, and the credit for that goes to Myra, Rabbi Myra. Yes, it does. How long were you here as a rabbi? I know that.
26 years.
22?
26.
26 years. It's nice to recruit a rabbi and have them stay. The short-termers tells you what you need to know. What you don't know about me is, and perhaps on the point that Merkin was making, is that I was born here in 1947, which makes me going on to 77. I was educated in the Washoe County School District and as well at the University of Nevada. And I refuse to call it University of Nevada, Reno, because that's a political act by the majority Southerners that live here. I started looking back on my education. My doctoral work was at the University of Arizona. So I've been a desert rat my whole life. And what I want to do, this is about the size of a seminar in a graduate program. And I don't know how many people are online. It's hard to include them in the size here. Perhaps our digital folks can do that. But what I'd like to do is answer your questions. I've already told you my specialty. I don't plan, I hope not, to have to engage that way. I know many of the people here, or I know of them, and my history goes a long way back. My goal when I was president of Temple Sinai was to see it survive, prosper, and to see it become a viable community resource, not just a synagogue, but a religious school and something that would stand for Judaism, though a minority in this predominantly Christian community, to see it survive as a symbol of American Judaism. And the key to that, at least in my mind at the time, because I had young sons, was to see the viability of and the attractive character of a religious school. When I took over this place as a president, it was clear to me that the membership at that time looked like me. Gray hair and aging. And that's not how you build a future in an organization like this. I had absolutely no idea what to do other than hire rabbis, what to do to make this place viable. It's been a pleasure for me to see the leadership change over time and to maintain that vision and expand it. We have young leadership, involved leadership, and I guess that goal has been achieved. How big is the religious school now?
I'm trying to think. We have 20, 25 students, I think.
Mhm.
So
That's an attractant to people who are perhaps young parents and interested in seeing religious education for
it
their
attracted
kids.
us, to be honest. It was one of the requirements. We knew it was going to be hard enough for our kids to be under the microscope as the rabbis' kids, and we thought if they're the only ones in the religious school, that's not going to work for them. And the fact that there was an existing and robust religious program here that we came into was something that absolutely made us want to be the rabbis here.
Well, thank you. I think the skill set, yours and Sarah's, have fit the needs of this congregation on the music and the religious school side. And when people ask me about you, I try to describe you as a mainline rabbi. Although you and I have talked politics and society so much, I'm not sure how many rabbis actually follow in Myra's tradition or perhaps yours, but I'm glad to see it carrying on. And by that, I simply mean centrist left and farther left. And
Center left and further left. That's
some of you who know me, including my dear wife, Leah, know me to have been a political scientist. And I spent a lot of time as and I calculated this last night as an advocate for higher education for some 35 years at the University of Nevada, which involved a lot of very painful moments in Carson City and some delightful moments with folks like Harry Reid as a senator. Harry supported what we were doing here. There was not much he could do to directly support a congregation like this, but he knew I was Jewish, and he did the right things when he could. I miss him in the state of Nevada. I ought to miss him. He did a lot statewide, and the main reason he did that, frankly, was to cultivate a base in northern Nevada. And we may see in this next electoral cycle a little bit of weakening of that. Someone like me will look at that, perhaps you wouldn't. So at this point, I'd like to see if there are any questions either from the...
Can you say something about growing up around Lewis and Ruth when the congregation was just beginning?
Okay, thank you, Myra, for that. My very first encounter with the group of founders for this congregation was me sitting on the steps. This would be about 1963 in our home when UAHC sent Joe Glazer to Reno to meet with a small group of people who became the founders of Sinai, who had left Emmanuel because Emmanuel was moving further to the right into Orthodoxy. And my father had been raised that way, and he didn't see it as fitting for the West or for Reno. And though he'd been a president of Temple Emmanuel and saw to the renovation of that synagogue, the old Temple Emmanuel, as I recall, because I was bar mitzvahed there, the sanctuary at Emmanuel had been remodeled and was very, very modern. The rest of the place was very, very old. And I don't know exactly, other than Orthodoxy, that drove this group of people to meet with Joe Glazer. And I was a youngster at that point, 14, 15, or 16. To listen to Joe Glazer tell these people how to form and make solid a Reformed congregation here in Reno. And Joe Glazer was a wonderful man, and we've survived. And if you look at the black and white photos on the wall here, I guess they've been taken down for the painting. Oh my gosh, he's got them here.
Yes, I
Set it up against here.
think you know some of these folks, right?
Yeah, set it against the table if you can.
Yeah.
That's my dad. Where'd you hide my mother? Anyway, this is the group of founders. That's the group of people.
Who's this little guy?
That is Jeff Garrell, who is now a finance specialist in Southern California.
Look at the one at the bottom left. I think the Ruth is in there.
Yeah, this is my mother. This is Jake Garfinkel. This is Mary Garfinkel. I don't remember her name. She was from Chicago, and they were here for a short period of time. Greenspun was the last name. Her husband ran a used car lot, and if you happen to go to his office, there were quite a few guns on the wall because he traded with the lower class of folks. This is the Masons at the setting of the
Cornerstone.
the cornerstone, which is out here. And I'm sure there's a group of Shriners there and a bunch of other folks. And this is what Sinai looked like when the congregation took it over. It looks a bit different with a parking lot, but you certainly can see the roof and several of the other features of this place. Quite a battle over this particular location. My father had bought the property, and rather than donating it to the fledgling synagogue, he told them they had to pay for it. And his view very simply was, if you get it for free, you won't take care of it. And what he simply did is donate the land, but required payment. It was a lot of money at that time, $8,000. And he saw to the fact that Sinai paid the money back, and then he'd redonate it. And that was his way of making sure that the Jews in Reno took this movement seriously. He was a hard-headed guy. Small businessman in this community, and with an 8th grade education was very successful here. He'd been a steam fitter in Rhode Island and up and down the East Coast. He came out here and came to Reno in 1941, met my mother who had come here for a divorce, and my father had come for 2 divorces, one when he was 19 and one, I forget how old he was, in 1944. He joined Temple Emmanuel when he could, came home from World War II, and started a plumbing business, and then turned that into a plumbing supply business that supported the entire family, and in an early sense, this congregation. He was Sinai's first president. I think that's because he could intimidate anybody. Ruth and Louis had 3 sons, and eldest was Ruth's by a previous marriage, and my older brother Kenny, who lives in Sun Valley, Idaho, and I were their 2 biological sons, and my sister Debbie Pomerantz was their sole daughter. She got special attention. Think about it. Right after the Holocaust, women were the future, and my sister got treated that way, much to the teasing and of her older brothers. And if she was here, she'd chew on me. But I made sure she and Gary were doing something else today. Have you another point to trigger memories?
Well, so one of the things I wondered about, you started to introducing us to some of the people who are the founders and matriarchs and patriarchs in this community. And when we walk around the building and we see names and other things, there's some that come up. Ethel Jaffe is one of the other names we see. A lot of places I know she has a name on the Torah and some art, and these are, I'll say what I do and hope you can add a little more color. I mean, I never had the pleasure of meeting her, but I have met a number of people of multiple generations who have talked about learning Hebrew from her, or her being a fixture in their life or their religious life and part of this community. So that was someone certainly wondered if you have. I would imagine you have some memories and some stories, and can tell us a little bit about her and how she and her whole family, and it wasn't just her, but helped kind of shape this congregation and this Jewish community.
Ethel was married to George. Both of them were from Providence, Rhode Island, whence my father had come. George was my father's nephew, although they were very close in age. The Dickens family in Providence was numerically large. It was actually 2 generations, because Lewis's father had emigrated to the United States. As near as I can tell, in the early 1890s, Lewis was born in 1907. So if you look at the old family photo, Lewis is one of the swaddlers in the front row. And in the back row are a bunch of adults. What had happened is my grandfather had immigrated from the Ukraine, ironically enough. He was a tobacconist by trade. And when he moved to someplace just a little south of Kiev, from Istanbul, he exported dairy products to his brother in Istanbul, who sent him fine Turkish tobacco. And when he decided, because the Tsar was, ironically enough, being aggressive and nasty to Ukraine, he came to a place called Savannah, Georgia. And that is where Leah is from. Savannah at that time was the largest tobacco trading location in the United States. He got to Savannah and he found out those fools, Leah excluded, those folks wanted him to work on Saturday, and he would not do that. So he moved to Providence and became a kosher butcher. And when he died and was buried, he was, and I don't know if this is customary or not, the cemetery was separated by gender. And my mother teased him about his father preferring to be buried next to the rabbi as opposed to below that. I never met most of these people. I only met actually his just older sister, who is also a swaddler in that photograph, which hangs in our house. Lewis came to Reno when he was 19 to take care of the legal side of a divorce. He had married a young Catholic girl whose family insisted on a divorce and a wiping clean of the record of having been married to a Jew. Lewis's family said, go out to Reno and get this divorce cleaned up legally.
Yeah.
So he did. And then he went back to Providence, and there was a large family arranged marriage waiting for him. And that didn't work out. So in the early, trying to remember what, it might have been August of 1941, he came out here to straighten out the legal side of the marriage he didn't want to be in. And he met Ruth. Prior to World War II, tiny Jewish community here. Many of the people at that groundbreaking were members of the community that he met. And Ruth's sister, Leah, had never met an arranged marriage that she did not prefer. So she arranged Lewis and Ruth, and that stuck.
Third time's the charm.
Yeah. Lewis was a plumber, steam fitter, and even though he was 35 at the time, he got drafted, and he arranged a position with the United States Navy. He had to go back to Boston to do that because he did not want to go in the Army. And he arranged a chief petty officer's rank for himself. And deployed to where the North African invasion was staging. And he'd had enough of that. And in 1944, he was discharged and came right to Reno. And his first job was building the steam plant at Hawthorne, a U.S. Navy ammunition depot. And when I've driven between here and Las Vegas, I can still see the remnants of his work.
Oh, wow.
It always, it's a must-see for me. And I can see buildings around Reno that he worked on as well. But about 1946, he decided being a plumber wasn't going to last. So he, with the help of of a Jewish person, a salesman from Oakland, established a plumbing supply house, which is where me and my two brothers grew up.
Okay.
We went right to work. Right after your bar mitzvah, handed you a broom and got to sweep out the warehouse. That building and warehouse, 65. It's painted white, and it has had several attempts to be sold. Nobody wants to buy it. That building, if you should go by it on Keystone Avenue, is Reno's first warehouse built with a construction technique of pouring the walls flat on the ground, putting them up. And they're all done that way now. McKenzie Construction wanted to experiment with that. And my dad said yes. And they built that sucker that way. But nobody wants it today.
I'm sure not on account of anything your father did.
It was an unusual building because about that time, there had been a large fire on between, it wasn't on Keystone, it's probably on Ralston, toward the center of Reno, a feed store, except this was huge, caught fire in days. And so the Keystone building had a huge fire sprinkler system in it, which had a huge valve from the water main into the distribution system for these little sprinklers. And my father did not like fire, and he used that setup to encourage contractors in this community to put in fire sprinkler systems.
Oh, okay.
And when the MGM in Las Vegas caught fire and the one here in Reno did not, the reason was the standard in Reno was fire sprinkler systems.
Yeah.
Even this building has them. I don't know where the main valve is, and I don't want to know. Lewis and Ruth were very proud. My father had an 8th grade education, and education is where we were directed. And I had come home from my graduate education when that meeting with Joe Glazer occurred. Mm-hmm. And I was already working at the university. I had no idea that by 2020, that service would involve 35 years at UNR. And I don't like to count the undergraduate and graduate years as adding to that, but you can add 7 to it. And so I'm pretty much a UNR fan. And maybe an enemy of UNLV.
My daughter has a red car, and he won't let her park it.
So, I wonder if you could, as you're describing the Jewish community was not large as you described, and we're not a huge community now. But I wonder what was it like being Jewish?
In this
growing
community?
up, and yeah.
A lot of people did not know we were Jewish. After World War II, I think at that time there was a sense of privacy, at least in a tiny Jewish community in a larger Christian and Mormon community. Reno, as I grew up, was Mormon and Italian Catholic, and not much grief at being Jewish, nor recognition of being Jewish. I do remember the neighborhood friction between a large Baptist kid and me over me being Jewish, but we were also best friends. This is a guy who we got in a rock fight, chucking rocks back and forth across the street, and I may have a scar here from where one of his took me to the emergency room for stitches. He and I got into a fist fight on the steps of the old Billinghurst. And many years later, my internist, a guy by the name of Phil Landis, was also from Reno. His dad was a doctor, and we'd gone to many of the same schools. He was poking around on my head, and he felt the scar, and he said, "How'd you get that?" So I told him the story. He said, "I always wondered what that fist fight was about." And it was a Baptist saying something anti-Semitic about Jews. And we had been raised by Lewis that anti-Semitism led to fighting words. They were fighting words. Now, Jeff Rocco in 7th or 8th grade was probably 6'1". And he, as I've told this story over the years, I've always said his arms were so long, his hands were about his kneecaps. There was no way I was going to win that fight. So a couple of weeks later, my older brother and I ambushed him and settled that score. And we went back to being best friends. And I don't know what he learned from that, because after UNR, he became a dentist. And I always figured you would not want to be Jewish in his dental chair. Anyway, what else has made you curious?
I don't know. Are there other changes that you've seen, or some things that have stubbornly stayed the same about either about just the Jewish community of Reno, or even Reno as a whole? Because you've been it's certainly grown a bit since you were a kid.
That is true, and I think some of the interesting ways it has grown. Much larger community. It's more diverse. There's a greater integration of Black individuals in this community, but still a tiny number, I think. Do any of you know of a place called Black Springs? Okay. It's an area north of here on this side of what was remains Highway 395. It was the only place in this community, if you were African American, that you could buy property to build a home. Hence the name Black Springs. Our household, the Dickens household, had a woman who some would call a housekeeper, Alice Smith. Now has an elementary school named after her. She was a very significant African-American activist in this community. NAACP, American Red Cross, and not likely to take crap from anybody. Ruth and Alice had met at a place called Joseph Magnan's in downtown Reno when Ruth worked during World War II. She always ran the children's department. And when Lewis came home and Ruth stopped working, Alice came with Ruth. She may have done a little housekeeping. I don't remember any of that. What I do remember is Alice having Ruth sit at a typewriter, and as Alice spoke, Ruth did this, and Alice was writing letters to the American Red Cross, the Nevada congressional delegation, which consisted of 2 senators and 1 member of the House of Representatives. And Alice would show up at the house on Tuesday afternoon with an agenda. And Ruth was basically her secretary. And I think she may have been paid wages while that was going on. The family moved, and Alice became more aged, and she discontinued the ruse of working for the Dickens family, and continued doing some activist and letter writing kinds of things. I remember at age 7 being taken by Alice in the Red Cross car, an old Plymouth, to sit. No, we didn't sit. We stood on the banks of the Truckee River handing out donuts and coffee to folks filling sandbags for a Truckee River flood. And when Alice did other kinds of volunteer work in better weather and so on Tuesday afternoon, I would go with her. And I think that has something to do with me connecting Jewish values for more contemporary liberal values. Not sure about my sister or my older brother, but they are clearly not as radical about that sort of thing as I am. And I think Alice's influence had a lot to do with that.
Wasn't Alice a connection to Sammy Davis when the hotels wouldn't let him stay?
I don't know if Alice was connected to. She was much older than Sammy Davis, but as some of you may know, Sammy Davis had a white Swedish American wife, Fay Britt, and she lived at Lake Tahoe, and they'd had a couple of kids, and a young man, a bar mitzvah. Do you remember what year that was?
No, it was before me.
Okay.
Because Ethel tutored him. Mark,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
That's the year.
the mom drove him down here for religious training prior to the bar mitzvah, and Ethel did that. And after the bar mitzvah, there was a reception at Harrah's, and Harrah provided the refreshments, so to speak. And there were a lot of Hollywood types there, and a small number of folks from this community. And at Harrah's, Sammy Davis stole the show from his son. That's not the kind of thing we would see in a synagogue per se. And Sammy grabbed the microphone and sang Candyman for everyone to listen to. An actress, I'm not sure if she was, a female from Hollywood by the name of Toady Fields. Okay. All standing in line at this wonderful buffet that Harris had prepared. And Toady was first in line. And she goes to the stainless steel tray that has chopped liver in it. Massive amount of chopped liver. And Toady takes a little piece of rye and scoops them out, takes a bite. And she said, "That is pork. That's not chicken liver." And nobody touched it. So the chef who was standing behind this tray of pork liver picked it up and took it away. He was pissed off. And I can't believe a chef in a hotel like with a reputation of Harris would not know the difference at the front end. It's probably the reason it stuck in my mind. Mayor Mybrit brought those kids down here, and Ethel Jaffe, married to my cousin, did the Hebrew training. Ethel also worked for the Washoe County, I think it was the recorder's office, and she handed out marriage licenses and took care of the paperwork associated with legal filings. And her daughter recently passed.
Yeah.
There is one son living here in Reno, Steve Jaffe, who has had a career with what was Sierra Pacific Powers, now Nevada Energy. Myra?
Well, but I'm thinking maybe this is myth, Robert, so straighten it out for me. That when the hotel, there was a time when Sammy Davis was playing the hotel and they wouldn't let him stay there. And
Well-
my memory is that the Jewish community somehow played a part in basically housing him or getting him a place.
I don't know about the housing thing. I do remember, as was often the case with African Americans, and I'm going to say erroneously and mythically, prior to the Civil Rights Movement, because I think it took some time after that to settle this in Nevada. But many of the African American musicians who were headliners could not stay, gamble, or socialize in regular hotels. Now, where they were welcome without a hotel was a place called the New China Club. And it had been, and had a gaming license, it had been the Asian American socializing place in Reno. And I always found it very interesting that the Asian Americans and the African Americans had this gaming place to play. And the New China Club was across the railroad tracks and across the street from Harris. So it always amazed me that those two things were so close. And also a place called Nevada Seafood on Sierra Street, which was owned by Japanese people who, for some reason, were not rounded up and placed in camps in World War II, with a camp south of Bishop and another one near the Oregon-Nevada border. And I remember going into this seafood place with my mom. She bought fresh seafood every Friday. And because she knew that's where you'd get it, because the Catholics were expecting it for seafood Fridays. And I remember going in there with her, and the Asian Americans loved Ruth. She always had a smile on her face, but she had been doing that through World War II. Ruth was a tolerant person, did the right thing usually. And I think that the fact that they had recognized her throughout the war, where they must have been absolutely afraid of being incarcerated, they recognized her as somebody who was friendly.
Thank you. That's a number of things I had no idea about the community, and just a wonderful anecdote to
Thank
kind
you.
of sum up who
But I
she
think-
was.
I think those values, Ethel's, Lewis's, Ruth's, some of the other people in that photo, as of the founders, yeah, they created the atmosphere of this place, which has stood more or less strong in this community since.
I know we have a few people in our audience here who have some questions for you, so we'll see if we can do that. And if there's anyone online who has a question, I would imagine you can put that in the comments, and we'll try to bring that live as well. So,
Well, I'm roughly a similar age as your children, and I was also born and raised here in Reno, but I was hoping you might be able to speak to the experience of what like raising a Jewish family in Reno in the early 80s.
I don't think it was in my generation and with my sons, I don't think it was much different than anything else. But my experience may not be what other people have experienced. I'm the son of a small businessman. Grew up in a very stable family with stable values, some of which were quite conservative, others of which were liberal. And in that context, I was considered, I suppose, a radical. I don't recall with the three boys that they had a great deal of difficulty. Perhaps Myra might recall them speaking with you. They were all soccer players, and that's where the rough side got worked out. But I don't remember much in the way of enemies or much in the way of serious anti-Semitism. I think what anti-Semitism I experienced was based on ignorance. And I think, too, that people let that go as they became more familiar. And I think the Jewish professionals, the doctors, the lawyers, the professors in this community made it easier for all of us.
Anyone else? I have a question for you. Having lived through many decades with Temple Sinai and having founded it, what words of wisdom would you pass on to today's members and leaders for us to sustain ourselves as a thriving congregation here?
You used the key word, sustain. And part of it's programs like this. Part of it certainly is the religious school. And then the really tough part, sustain it financially. I have been president, and my academic expertise and professional expertise has been budgets, lobbying for budgets. And the one that I probably know the most about is state of Nevada in higher education. As president and as a member of this congregation, budgets scare me, because there have been some times when how to sustain it might not be done. And somehow it gets done. One of the differences in this community that I and others wanted to see done for Sinai was to broaden the membership base, make sure it was a membership that was welcoming to families, and did a whole lot for the tots and the kids moving toward the bar and bat mitzvahs, and hoping that with the growth of this community, its base, Sinai's base, would continue. For me, what I had to do was to let go of some of the aspects of leadership so that others who were interested in being or becoming leaders would do so, that there were friendly and available roles for them at Sinai. I'm delighted to see you as the current president for that reason. My expertise as a recruiter of rabbis was always driven by that, to bring to this congregation and synagogue people who would, professionals, heads of congregations, who would see to it being sustained. Rabbi Myra, and the stability she provided, though clearly a radical in the community, helped achieve that. How many of you knew that? Well, I don't think any of you knew Abe Feinberg or have ever seen Abe Feinberg's name here. You want to see a radical rabbi, that would be the one. At the time of the Vietnam War, he was a rabbi in Toronto. And his son, I think, was a practicing physician here. And Abe, in retirement, came to Reno and stayed. He participated in some of the early anti-Vietnam War demonstrations, including going to Hanoi with Jane Fonda and meeting with Ho Chi Minh. I did not know that.
He was one of 4 clergy people, and he was the Jew. The others were Protestant. I think it might have been a Catholic. And he was like the youngest, but he was already in his 60s, I think. At
Wow.
that point. And they met with Ho Chi Minh, and it was during all the Vietnam protests. And there actually was a pamphlet put out, I'm not sure by who, but somebody to the right, The Red Rabbi, all about him and all about his anti-Vietnam stuff.
Wow.
He had a cane. He had a gorgeous cane that Ho Chi Minh had given him
Wow.
when he was over there. Yeah.
That I did not know. I did know that the recording of "Give Peace a Chance" that John and Yoko did in their bedroom. Yeah, he is part of that. So that
Hmm.
connects Temple Sinai also to all of that, which is pretty amazing for our little shul.
Yeah, he had a really beautiful deep voice in his younger.
Oh, and he had
and,
been
and there was a point of time when he dropped out of being a rabbi.
that's right.
He came back during World War II and all the anti-Semitism rose, but he kind of got sick of the whole thing at once.
He'd been an opera singer?
He was a radio singer.
Yeah, okay.
And eventually ended up with John and Yoko, and he was part of the bed-in, and he was singing. He was wonderful. He was a great man.
Well, when the congregation met to discuss the various rabbis that were competing for this position, Myra was the last, I think, of the 4 who came here. And back by, I'll never forget this, by that wall, I was standing up, president of the congregation, and watching everything going on. And Abe sidled up to me and said, despite his values, he said, "You cannot hire a female. This place will not tolerate that." That simply motivated me, if not Myra, to go ahead and do it.
No, he came over really quickly. I met with him, and we had a lot in common.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt that at all.
We had both been on the staff of Episcopal churches now.
But I liked him. He was a wonderful person. What other insights are you?
Well, I mean, I have millions of questions, and we could go on, but we're sort of drawing to the end of our time. So we may invite you back for more stories and more insights.
That's your call.
Perhaps having you and Rabbi Myra together, and we can do a whole show. I think Jill has a few things that she'd like to close us out with, just to kind of let us know what's upcoming, because we've more in the series and more things going on in the community. But certainly, I just to give her the full floor. I want to thank you so much for sitting down. This is just tremendous, and
thank you. My delight.
Thank you to Jill for her work in doing this. Thank you to Michael in the back and Tommy, wherever you are, for all you did, and of course Jewish Nevada, which is one of our sponsors, but mostly to all of you, whether you are here or you're out there watching us remotely, or anyone who chooses to watch or listen to this later on. Thank you so much. I mean, a community is made a community by the people who participate in it. And so I thank you all for taking some of your time to join us for this today.
And I know when I go in the lobby and see that hanging, I'm going to look at it very differently after this afternoon. So thank you. During the month of November, Who Knew will be Rabbi Zober taking us back to the Old West and what it was like on TV and how Jews were represented throughout what decades?
I think we're going from the 60s, and well, most of them are older, but starting in the 60s,
Okay.
and we'll kind of travel through time and see what Hollywood thought of Jews in the Old West, and maybe some comparisons to anyone who remembers some not that Old West, but the West.
Yeah, and we'll be doing that 4 Sundays, November 3rd, 10th, 17th, and 24th. Again here, 1 o'clock, light refreshments. That will close out 2025. January, we'll be holding a program in conjunction with International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And Rabbi Ben will be speaking with our very own Michael Gordon. And he'll have family reflections to pass on that. February, Rabbi Sarah Zober will be doing Jewish love songs. It's Valentine's Day month, so let's find out what we can do about that. March, our very own Barbara Weinberg will be meeting us at Sinai. And in April, Daryl Dworkin will be also meeting us at Sinai. And if you don't know him well, I can tell you there's a fascinating history there about Jews in the toy industry. So even bring little people with you then. We've got light refreshments in the lobby. Just one other brief announcement. This Tuesday night in our sukkah, we're going to be having an interfaith potluck. And about 60 members of the interfaith community will be joining us with Sinai members. And we're just going to be sharing goodwill, fellowship, and blessings of thanks for this harvest season. It's not too late to RSVP. So if you're interested, there are flyers as you leave right on the table where the food will be. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, Rabbi Ben. Robert, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you can join us because who knew?
Well, no,
Who knew?
thank you.